Welcome to the Robotics and Science Fiction Podcast. I'm Robin Murphy, and today we have Michael Swanwick, one of the most respected science fiction authors in the field. Howdy.
Hello.
It's such a delight to have you here today. Your Nebula Award-winning Stations of the Tide is one of my favorite novels of all time. And I really love never knowing the bureaucrat's name, structure. You know, I couldn't think he could be the protagonist because he was just a bureaucrat. And then you had that whole Cordwainer Smith ending. It's wonderful. And if you're listening and haven't read it, please put it on your to-do list. It's great. But I'd never thought of you and robots until I ran across that 2010 We Robots anthology, which led off with your story, The Scarecrow's Boy. Is that your only story with robots as a main character?
I think it is. I'd have to go through my bibliography to be sure. But yeah, mostly mostly robots are supporting characters in my fiction.
Well, it starts off. I'm thinking it's a supporting character. You know, I thought it was going to be kind of a takeoff on the Wizard of Oz with a dumb robot who was clearly smarter than he seemed, and there was a journey to Canada. But, it turned out and kind of flipped that the robot turned out to be a main character. And the main theme of the story was kind of like that cute saying, be the person your dog thinks you are. Only for me, it was, whoops, better be the person your robot thinks you are. So what motivated writing The Scarecrow's Boy?
I like the possibility that robots might turn out to be better people than us. And as far as I'm concerned, the only real point to writing about artificial intelligence is that it's going to be inherently different from human intelligence, and that it's the divergence that's fascinating. A successfully imitative AI, one that was made a perfectly convincing artificial person, is not very interesting. We've got plenty of interesting people now, but just the thought of how will machines think differently from us and how they might evolve it's just worth thinking about. And that's all there is to it, really. I don't start my stories knowing what I'm going to conclude. I look into, I write stories about interesting questions that I don't know the answer to. And so the stories are all kind of a search for the answer.
And the story is so great, and that part about what's artificial intelligence being different. One of the ways we're learning that artificial intelligence is different is we're just now beginning to grapple with what we call persistent intelligence. The idea that you're going to have something run for more than a day or 2 days or weeks or years. And now that we've got things like Alexa and Siri, it's how will it adapt to you over time? And the idea, without trying to give away the story, that the boy, what you are and what you become may be two different things and become totally unrecognizable. And what a terrible shame. I think it's something for kids to read that story and think about. What do you want to be when you grow up? Because you're maybe a robot judging you at some point.
Well, this is embedded in nature. There was a very famous experiment in Siberia where a scientist took foxes and he bred them for docility. And what happened over many decades is they slowly the foxes became more and more tame and more like dogs. And then there was one point there where they displayed emergent behavior. They spontaneously, one of the foxes just flopped over and offered his belly and asked for a belly rub, basically, just like a dog. And that was an amazing thing to happen because they were not breeding for this. It came with the docility. So as we watch the development of robots, we're going to find interesting and unexpected things.
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things we feel is a hallmark of intelligence. So you've seen the Spielberg's movie, AI, Artificial Intelligence, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not my favorite movie. I think there's a lot of both cinematically flaws, but I think there's a lot of errors in it. But one of the things that really was appealing was Teddy, the companion robot. I thought he got that. That was pretty right. So if all the kids had Teddy, what would happen today? I mean, what would you do with Teddy? Do you think that they would throw them away like the character in The Scarecrow's Boy, and you just basically threw away this very valuable and intelligent robot?
I think what would happen today would be very much what's happened with animals. 200 years ago, everybody was pretty much fine with horses being beaten on the street and dogs being killed in pit fights and so on. And slowly we developed more of a conscience toward them. And I suspect that when you have something like Teddy, who looks just like a sweet little boy, that will go through that same couple 100-year process, probably in a decade, maybe less. I think once you can respond emotionally to a robot, you're going to be kinder to it. There was a really fascinating story I found. I was at a weapons conference because I go to a lot of odd things. And I found out that in the Iraq War, they used a certain number of robots. Mm-hmm. And there's among the military, there's a principle: you do not leave a comrade behind. And they had incidences where a robot was taken down by enemy fire, and soldiers went into live fire to bring it back because it was one of them. So I see no reason why our relationship with our creations shouldn't actually be a friendly one.
Yeah, we're seeing that. That happens a lot with the Endeavor PackBot. And they were getting requests, even though it was totally blown up, to please keep it intact. And it's like, but all the parts are interchangeable. You know, people get attached to it. So you're right, we're gonna see a lot of that. We're also beginning to see more of the Marines are beginning to say that with some of the robots that they're using to help carry things, that are beginning to be more like a team member or a pet. You know, like you've got a mule, yeah, it's not one of you, but it is. It's part of what you're thinking about, and you would hate to have anything bad happen to it because it's valuable and it's sort of there. So it's a kind of an interesting thing. So in AI, the movie AI, Artificial Intelligence, Teddy was the teddy bear robot.
Oh, excuse me.
Well, no big deal. You know, but you know, it's easier to see the Haley Joel Osment character treating like a boy. But you've got this whole class of robots that aren't humanoid. So what do you do with them? And will we be careless with them? And I think, you know, like you said, they'll be more like, we'll start out bad and get more sensitive to it. Now, you know, The Scarecrow's Boy, just a fantastic story. And I think of you as a novelist, but of course you've written a lot of tremendous stories. Is there any difference when you're in an anthology to doing an anthology in print and doing an anthology in an audio version? Because I listened to it on the Audible version.
I have never been able to listen to my own fiction being read by somebody else. It just feels wrong because it's not the same as the voice in my head. So I cannot bring myself to hear it. So I have no idea.
Did they give you any choice, or do they just say, your publisher says, hey, we're licensing this off, you're good with it, and that's at the end of the process?
For novels, yeah. For novels, that's all taken care of by the publisher. For short fiction, the audio people get in touch with you, and then you make a deal.
Do you approve the voice, or do you just say, yes, I'm selling you this story or licensing this story, and just move on and never listen to it?
I don't have any say in that. Authors don't have much say in things like, unless you're, Stephen King or Ursula Le Guin, you don't have any say over your who reads your fiction or the covers. They like to keep the authors away from both of those. I did have one very flattering moment. I was reading the first chapter of my next novel, which is the Iron Dragon's Mother, which completes a trilogy of standalone novels, which I began 25 years ago. And I read the first chapter at the Worldcon, and my agent came up to me afterwards and said, "You are not to do your own reading for the audiobook," which is actually a compliment, because what she meant was I was good enough that she could tell I might be tempted to. So I'm actually a pretty good reader, but I am not up there with audiobook reader level. I've actually talked to some of the voice people that do these books. When they say good morning, it's like, good morning. It sells it. You're convinced that the morning is good. It's speech on an entirely different level from you and I experienced that.
Well, I can understand, but wow, that was one of the things that surprised me is, I don't know if you've read The Calculating Stars, but Mary Robinette Kowal, she, I saw, oh wait, she's narrating her own book. That's weird. And then it turns out she's had a whole separate life of being a narrator. So on top of being a puppeteer and an author, and it was just sort of like, well, she's a little overachieving. Just this amazing book, and she can narrate it with all these voices perfectly, and apparently does other things too. So but yeah, I guess you really wouldn't expect authors to do it, but it does seem a shame that you don't get a choice about voices because of the way you hear it in your head.
Well, since I never listened to my own stuff, it doesn't really affect me much.
Well, you don't just write science fiction, you write analyses, thoughtful analyses of science fiction. So as a science fiction critique, what do you think of robots in science fiction? Where do you think they fit in?
I think actually most robotic stories are based on older science fiction robotic stories. So, and this is an endemic problem with science fiction. A lot of science fiction is based on older science fiction people who are really young. And so it's sort of rare for a story to come up with something really interesting because they're not necessarily thinking about the robotics. I thought there was a story back in the 90s called Wayne's Carpets by Greg Egan. Wayne's Carpets. Terrible title. Everything else about that story is wonderful. It's set on an interstellar probe that has a population of something like 100,000 people, and it's about a meter long. They're all electronic, and they're all carefully edited versions of their human originals. So they have no fear. They have no vices. They're all very good people. And of course, there's still conflict because they're people and people are complicated. But it was a wonderful story for many reasons, but one of them was just the possibility that our children could be better than us. And that was a wonderful thing to actually see embodied in action as opposed to simply positive.
Yeah, a lot of the robotics is thrown out as more of the techno-thriller, robot uprising, that sort of thing, as opposed to looking at a more of the friendliness, symbiotic. That's what I liked about the culture universe, Ian Banks' culture universe, is that AIs didn't want to be people, but they thought people were valuable and friends, and they would die for that. And people also thought the same thing about the AIs, is that, hey, wait, no, if the culture is enslaving an AI, that is perfectly fair to come in and start a war with them or start a subversive war. Both sides liked each other, but they didn't want to be each other. There was a sort of a mutual respect. I thought that was pretty cool and something to be strive for.
Well, there's absolutely no reason for a superior organism to want to kill us off any more than we want to kill off gorillas and chimpanzees. although um, it is possible in the competition for resources to do so. But I think there's a possibility of good stories based on robot uprisings, but they have to be written by someone who's actually afraid of machines, who finds them genuinely threatening. Otherwise, it's artificial. It's not real. You're not speaking to genuine emotions.
That's a good point. Well, can we expect any more short stories with robots in them soon, or you're going to stay with the Iron Dragon series, or?
Well, the Iron Dragon series is completed.
Okay.
And it came as a surprise. It was an accidental trilogy. I wrote the first book, and at the end of it, everything was done. And I was done with it. And then 15 years later, I had an idea for a short story, and I began the story, and I realized when I finished it, that was the first chapter of another novel. So that's done. I'm working right now. I'm not working on a novel. I don't have an idea that seems strong enough, wonderful enough to spend a couple of years of my life writing. So I'm working on a lot of short fiction at the moment. I've got something like 5 stories that have been sold and are coming out soon. I've got my novel. I have another novel, well, a short novel that I co-wrote with Gardner Law. And it's actually an interesting story. He started writing a novel in the 1970s. He wrote a big chunk of it, and then he was stopped by the top point. And in, I think, 1990, he gave what he had to me. He said, "Here, let's see if we can do make a novella out of it." And so together we turned it into a novella. I think a very good one. It was sort of like the book of Job without a happy ending. It was a very downbeat, depressing novella, but a very good one. And we talked over the years about writing a second and third novella. The first one's called City of God. So like City of Angels, City of Men. And we kept putting off it. About a year or so ago, it came back to life, the second novella. And we had it half finished when Gardner died. So I knew then that we would never write the third novella because me, I would change of voice. But I could finish the second novella in his voice. And he had a happy ending for the novel. And because Gardner was such a downbeat writer, nobody believes me when I say a happy ending. So I really wanted people to see that. I wanted that for the conclusion. So I took his ending, I changed the direction of the second novella to bring it to the end of the password and put that together. It's coming out in, I think, about a year from tour.com. There's an edition for that. So that would be kind of a memorial to him.
So where's that coming out? You dropped out a little bit.
Tour.com.
Okay. Yeah, they're doing really well.
So they're doing original physical books too, in addition to that really wonderful website that they have. So they're publishing that. That will be like one last novel for Gardner. So I'm quite emotional about it. So it's an important book to me.
Well, I am looking forward to it. Anything that has such value to you is bound to be just wonderful. Well, our time is almost up. Thank you so much. What is your favorite robot, including the Scarecrow?
Actually, my favorite robot is my Scarecrow. And the reason for it is just one line he says when he says, "We are as God and Sony made us." And I cannot tell you how happy I was when that line popped into my head. So that's just for selfish personal reasons. Any character who will give you a line like that, you're going to love forever.
Oh, absolutely. And Scarecrow is one of my favorite all-time robots. And in the story, sometimes short fiction is so much more impactful than a novel, and that one just really grabbed me. So thank you so much for writing it. I hope you do eventually write more stories with robots in them. And thank you again for being here with us today, Michael.
No, thank you very much for having me.
And if you want to learn more about real robots, everyone check out my book, Robotics Through Science Fiction, Artificial Intelligence Explained Through 6 Classic Robot Short Stories. And remember to subscribe to our newsletter and YouTube channel so you won't miss a thing.